Welcome back to GEMS Podcast. I'm the founder and host, Miss Genesis Amaris Kemp, and with me today in the hot seat is Bethany Snyder. And here's a bit about Bethany. MPP, she is an advocacy strategist, enthusiast, optimist, and the founder of Snyder Strategies LLC, a boutique consulting firm she formed to share and leverage her deep understanding of the advocacy world with nonprofit and membership-based organizations. With nearly 25 years of experience in communications, advocacy, and public affairs, Bethany is a seasoned professional and a nonprofit advocacy expert. She has been on all sides of the advocacy desk as a grassroots advocacy director, a lobbyist, a consultant, and a communications director. But last but not least, a U.S. Senate staffer. She'll help turn your supporters into lifelong advocates and donors. Who doesn't want that? Bethany received her Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology and Women's Study from the University of Iowa and has a master's in public policy from the Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. In her spare time, Bethany leads Central Iowa Rainbow Families, which provides support, social, and advocacy opportunities for LGBTQ identified parents in Central Iowa. She and her partner are also donors and active volunteers for family equality. And without further ado, please welcome Bethany Snyder to GEMS Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure, Bethany. And before we dive into our segment, which is going to definitely focus on nonprofit advocacy, I want to know you on a personal note. So I'm going to give you two options. We can play a rapid fire game, which consists of 10 questions, or we can break the ice. Which would you like?
Let's do 10 questions.
Woo! So we're playing rapid fire with Bethany and Genesis. Here we go. So question numero uno, dream car.
BMW.
2, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
3, Apple or Android?
Oh, Apple.
Okay. I'm partial Apple. I have an Apple computer, but a Android phone. Okay, 4. If you could have any superpower in the world, what would it be?
Mind reading.
5. If money were no option and you could go anywhere around the world, but here's the kicker. You just found out that they are no longer flying back to your home base for various reasons. Where would that be?
I've always wanted to go to Fiji, so.
Okay. 6. If you were a fly on the wall and you got to eavesdrop on any conversation, what conversation are you eavesdropping in?
Oh, that is a tough one. I would say eavesdropping on my parents talking about me.
7. Okay, here's a good one. If you could go back into time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, don't worry about others. Be you. Don't be small. Just live in your full authenticity.
8, favorite movie or book?
My favorite movie is hands down Dirty Dancing.
Oh, 9. Okay. If you could, never mind. I don't want to do that one. So you're on a deserted island, right, Bethany? There is a shop on the island, but your funds are limited and you only have 3 items to choose from that you could purchase. So you could choose from 2 bananas and a mango, a t-shirt, or a CD, but there may not be a CD player. What are you choosing?
2 bananas and a mango.
Yeah. Okay. And 10. This is the pass or play. So if you play, I ask you one last question. If you pass, you can ask me a question.
Okay.
What are you doing? Passing or playing?
Pass.
Okay, what's your question?
What is the most exotic place you've ever visited?
Ooh, I've been down to the Caribbean. I don't know if I would consider it exotic. So I've been to Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is where my mom's from, the Bahamas, St. Lucia. I think they're all exotic in their own way.
Yeah, those sound
Yeah,
delightful.
I'm a little biased because my mom is West Indian, so she's Caribbean, and my
Oh.
dad was South American. So thank you for playing Rapid Fire with Genesis. Now let's jump into our segment, which is nonprofit advocacy. So, Bethany, I want you to tell the listeners what made you get involved in nonprofit.
So I've been engaged in nonprofits and nonprofit advocacy specifically my whole entire career. I have always had that kind of activisty perspective. I was the one in my social circle who's always like the cruise director. I was always organizing people, getting people hyped up. And I also felt really deeply as a kid a sense of like social justice and wanting to fight for that. So those two together kind of bring you to I think, an advocacy perspective. So, but I really feel deeply about nonprofit advocacy. I feel we need nonprofits to be engaged in advocacy to make our democracy work well. I really feel it's that core to our country.
Nice. And there are some misnomers out there because sometimes people don't want to necessarily get involved in the nonprofit space, whether it's working or donating. But I want to tackle the working piece
Mhm.
because everyone has said, oh, if you go work for a nonprofit, you don't get paid that much money. But so
Mhm.
you should definitely love what you're going to do if you tap into this space. What would you like to say to those individuals?
Well, I've worked in nonprofits, or I've worked for for-profit consulting firms that provide services in nonprofits. So and then I've also worked in the government sector. So I've never worked for corporate America, but I would say, and I've made really good salaries that I've turned down because I needed to be involved in mission-based work. For me, it's really passion, and I cannot spend 8 hours a day not doing something that I don't care about and I don't feel is furthering our community and our world. So for me, that's what it comes down to. And I think you can make a good living and you can make good money working in the nonprofit space. You just have to make sure you know how to sell yourself, know how to research those nonprofits. And really, I always say, look out for number one, right? Regardless if you're working in for profit or nonprofit, always look out for your own career.
That's sound and solid advice. So what I took away from that is look out for your own career. So be your own advocate and champion when it
Mhm.
comes to making those career moves. Research the nonprofit agency that you are trying to work with or partner
Mhm.
with, and then three, I guess, negotiation. Because if you have that art of negotiation, you negotiate your salary up front, you could definitely come out on the other side of the table without feeling that you're not getting paid your worth.
Absolutely. And there's lots of other benefits to working at nonprofits. Sometimes the salary might be lower, but I've found increased flexibility or benefits or vacation time. And those are all things that are really important to me as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've always been in corporate America. So I spent 15 years there. And then I recently applied for a few nonprofit jobs. Didn't get it because my background's oil and gas. So it's kind of hard to show
Mhm.
how your skills are transferable, even though supply chain, you could do that in any industry because you're always managing people and there's various moving components.
Absolutely.
But one thing that I do like about the nonprofit space is the amount of work that they do and how they're actually out in the community. They're not sitting behind desk or whatnot, but they're becoming the face of the community. So looking from the outside in, when you were working for nonprofit, what are some of the ways that you got people engaged to give funding to those agencies?
Well, that's a really good question. So it's interesting to think about the intersection between advocacy and fundraising. And oftentimes, this is not something that nonprofits think about. Actually, they sometimes see them as competing. So I worked at a large health voluntary nonprofit that has a very recognizable name. And when I first started working there as a grassroots advocacy director, I remember some of my goals were, okay, you need to build we need you to recruit 3,000 people to your action network. And this is an organization that recruits 1 million, purportedly 1 million people in the state do a walk every year, or, these, walks for this organization. So I thought, well, that should be simple. I assume you've already talked to those 1 million people and asked them if they want to be engaged in advocacy. And they're like, no, we don't do that. And that their thoughts were, no, you go out to community fairs and health fairs and you recruit people from the outside. And I said, why would we go outside this building to ask people to take action on our legislative priorities when there are 1 million people who have already said they're committed to what we are? And so what I did was I went to those development directors, those fundraisers, and I said, hey, let's work together. And there's a lot of compelling reasons for doing advocacy. Donors are advocates who are donors who are advocates give 60% more money, donate more money than donors that aren't advocates. An advocate is 7 times more likely to donate to your organization than a non-advocate. And all these things, what they just show you is just bringing people closer to your mission, right? And what I also love about advocacy and fundraising is oftentimes nonprofits come and they're like, all I do is feel like I'm sending out fundraising requests. I'm just asking my people for money. What's great about advocacy is you can ask them to do lots of things that don't involve money. Contact your lawmaker, tweet about this, tell your friends and family about how we can, just think about how we can cure cancer through increasing funding for research, right? So there's so many ways to engage your donors in your mission that may not be asking them for money, but that will encourage them to give more.
Absolutely. So some of the nonprofit agencies, or I don't even know if you would say agencies that I've partnered with, have been American Cancer Society. They do the Relay for Life, United Way. I've done their golf tournaments. Also Junior Achievement. Are just a few. And some of the things that we do are like different open houses where you bring people together. And of course, if you tell them, oh, we're going to have refreshments or there'll be lunch or dinner, people are going to flock because they're like, oh, free food. And then you tell them about your mission and how that mission ties to them. And then I also know from the cancer standpoint, that for me felt real, being an advocate, but also being a donor, because I've lost loved ones to cancer. So I felt compelled to give to that organization because I wanted to, push the needle further to help find those cures and stuff. So I feel like if you reach out to people who are already tied to a specific need and passion, they'll be more susceptible of donating their funds to that organization. Or sometimes people just need to know, what is your organization about? How is it adding value? How is it helping the community, and etc. Versus just getting that phone call, hey, would you like to donate to St. Jude? Or hey, would you like to donate to the American Diabetes Association? Because that's not personal. People want to know.
Yep, that's transactional, and fundraising and advocacy and nonprofits are all about relational. Absolutely.
So let's talk about what does the life of a non-advocacy, a nonprofit advocacy look like? What are some of the things that you do on a daily basis to really help promote your mission?
Yeah, definitely. So some of the things that, so I own my own consulting firm called Snyder Strategies, and I work with nonprofits around the country to better engage their people in their advocacy goals. So what that means is, what I say is, nonprofits, all we have is our people. Corporations can give campaign checks, can give money to get what they want. All nonprofits have is our people. And that's so powerful. That is actually, I think, more valuable than campaign checks. And I know it's hard to think in this cynical time, but that is so valuable. So what I do with my clients is I'm often definitely doing strategy. So if one of my clients is Head Start California, and they're trying to get $50 million from the California legislature to go towards Head Start. I mean, great mission, right? Head Start, the most vulnerable families and children in the state. And so I work with them on strategy, on talking points, on messaging, on who are we targeting, which lawmakers are we targeting this week, and which advocates do we need to target? Is this a grass tops ask? So those like your highly engaged folks, maybe your agency leaders, or is this grassroots? We are asking those parents and just your allies to engage. That is what a lot of my time is spent doing. I also work with my clients. Oftentimes they just can't figure out the secret sauce to get their people engaged. And it's hard to ask them, why won't you take action when I ask you? You say you're belonging to this organization, so we do, pass policy, yet when I ask you to contact your lawmaker, you won't. And sometimes the members won't tell them, but they'll tell me because I'm a stranger, I'm not part of the organization. They don't have any personal connection to me. So I often do these things called advocacy roadmaps, where I'll talk to their donors and their members, and I'll say, hey, why aren't you engaged in advocacy? What could the organization do better? What isn't compelling? What isn't clicking? And then I can help the organization develop strategies to better engage folks.
I like that because you're asking the what and you're getting to the root cause of it. And once you get to the root cause, then you could provide solutions to bridge the gap. Another thing is just making sure people are staying engaged. So, how do you feel about team buildings? Because I think if profit organizations could do it, why can't nonprofits do it? Like have those team building activities with the people that are inside of the organization.
Absolutely.
And once you build that strong team, then you could really have a united front that will help externally.
No, absolutely. That's actually really a great point. So when I work with my clients, my policy expertise is in the healthcare and public health sector. So I work with a lot of think about provider medical groups, public health associations. So one of the things they say to me is we need to get patients involved in advocacy. We want patients involved in advocacy. And I say, well, does your CEO know what you're doing? Does your COO? Does all your staff already engage in advocacy? I would say you need to clean your own house before you go outside asking other people to get involved. And I call that circles of engagement. Oftentimes people want to jump to this outside folks, but I'm like, why would someone else outside your organization want to engage in advocacy if your own people inside don't want to? Let's start with them first, and then you can build upon that to start engaging others. So absolutely.
Yes. And then let's focus on patient advocacy right now, because I feel like I've been on both sides. I've worked in the cancer center before, and then I've also advocated. So sometimes patients don't feel like they are really being seen and heard and doing both of them together. And I feel like sometimes doctors are only looking at it from a monetary standpoint, when in actuality, it should be a partnership between the patient and the physician to really build an effective synergy and have those relationships where that patient wants to, once they finish their treatments or whatnot, they want to be a part of the community. They want to give back. But if they feel like they're just a statistic, they're just a number, they're not going to be reluctant to, support that organization, even though it may help somebody else, because they're like, who was there to help me when I needed it?
Absolutely. Yeah. What's great about engaging patients is they have such a story to tell. And those personal stories are really what drives our legislative change. I know we don't think about that very often, but anyone can share stats and figures. I can tell you, you can tell me how many people are dying of cancer, how many people will get cancer, right? But that's impersonal. But what really touches people's hearts are those personal stories. Like I said, I was a United States Senate staffer. And when we would talk with people, my boss wouldn't next day he wouldn't be like, oh my God, did you know that so many percentage of Black folks get cancer? That's not what we were talking about. He was like, do you remember that mother telling me about her kid who couldn't access cancer services? Right. It's that story. And I think that's where the power comes. And even with staff of the organization, it's about telling that story that really brings light to those stats and statistics.
And then also, when you're telling those stories, have a diverse group of people that are sharing their stories to really show to the people who are interested in donating that we are passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and make sure those are people who've actually benefited from that organization. Don't just hired, paid, and trained actors or actress to be the poster board people for your campaign. No, you need to make it real and relevant, in my opinion. So what are some of the experience there whenever y'all are making promotional materials and just really trying to get out in the community? What are some things that you've seen that have worked well?
Oh, that is a great question. And I mean, especially when it comes to healthcare, no one can say health inequities are that's the biggest challenges in our healthcare system. And that there's definitely, for all of us to be healthy, we need to address that. I worked on an awesome campaign in Minnesota to get folks when the Affordable Care Act was first passed, and there's healthcare expansion for access to insurance. And so I led this great campaign across the state to get folks to sign up for health insurance. And we knew that the people who were most uninsured were people of color, LGBTQ folks, the refugee and immigrant community. And so my number one goal was to make sure I hired organizers from those communities. I wanted to make sure there's a huge Somali population in Minneapolis. I had 2 Somali organizers. And there was no way that we could have made inroads into those communities without those folks able to speak the language, live in the community, and know the people. Also had, Spanish language speakers. We had LGBTQ outreach folks. And then we had the rural areas. We had folks from greater Minnesota who had lived and worked in rural communities. I was going to bring someone from Minneapolis out to Thief River Falls to tell them why they should sign up for health insurance. So I say definitely you need to be, and it was hard. I would say it could have been easier for me just to hire a whole bunch of white people who look like me, but that wasn't going to be successful, nor was it the right thing to do. And so it really was very intentional and took a lot of time, but was so powerful.
Yes. And how can we challenge more people to really, one, look at nonprofits, 2, really advocate, but make sure when you're advocating, it should be heart-centered, because I think heart-centered is what's going to speak. A pair of lips can say anything, but if I see that your actions are aligning with your words, that's also going to sway me. And then 3, always be open to learning and growing, whether it's receiving feedback, whether it's surveys or etc. But you definitely have to make it practical, and also put it in layman terms. Like sometimes if you're using these big words and jargon that people don't understand who aren't in your field, they're going to tune you out. And I'm just going to be real, because if someone comes to me, even though I'm very educated, and you say something that just goes over my head, I'm not going to stop and engage in the conversation, because you've already went over my head and I've checked out.
No, absolutely. Messaging is I think one of the most important and overlooked things when we do nonprofit advocacy. So many of the folks who do nonprofit advocacy are public policy professionals. I guess I'm included in that as well. But what you need to write for lawmakers or for legislation is very different than how it's going to compel you and me to take action on an issue. And I can't tell you how many healthy debates I've gotten in with the public policy professionals about we just should not use that word. That word does not mean anything to anyone outside of this room, or maybe the 5 other people who know that word. So a great example is I lived in Minnesota for a long time. So I was working on the, it was smoke-free campaign, right? Remember back in the early 2000s, we were passing clean indoor air laws. Yeah. Can you talk about a culture change?
Oh yeah. People used to smoke in the office and have liquid.
Grocery store. You could smoke while you're ashtrays on the grocery carts. Anyway, it's so hard for people to think now, but we called it the Freedom to Breathe campaign. And how powerful is that? It's positive. Who doesn't want to breathe? Anyway, and it was just a great, powerful message that can relate to people in the restaurant industry who were great advocates for us. They were definitely the people who were adversely impacted every day by secondhand smoke. But then also just relates to folks like you and me who just don't, we just want to have the freedom to breathe where we're sitting. So I think that's a great example of turning something into it could be a more complicated issue, but just really boiling it down to something that people can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I was thinking about, because I have so many ideas and questions I want to ask, but I have to be respectful of your time. So what are some other myths in the nonprofit space that we could debunk briefly? Because I feel like people really need to understand nonprofit from a holistic view in order to move past some of the preconceived notions and assumptions.
Yes. There are so many when it comes to advocacy. The number one thing is people think that nonprofits can't do advocacy. So there's this tax status for nonprofits called 501c3s. And that's what most nonprofits are organized under, this tax status. And somehow there's some kind of cruel rumor that's been going on for the last 50 years. I don't even know when it started, that people think that we're a nonprofit, we can't do advocacy. It's against the law. which is completely untrue. Now, of course, there are rules, there are boundaries, there are things you need to pay attention to, just like any industry, but it's not against the law for a nonprofit to engage in advocacy. I've only worked in nonprofit advocacy for 25 years. So I've made a life out of it in multiple nonprofits. So I think that's the first one. I think what happens is people confuse advocacy with politics. And what politics is very clear in the eyes of the IRS or funders. It's political parties, candidates, and elections. So as long as you don't say solving, curing cancer is a Democratic idea, which is dumb, it's not, anyone can get cancer, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. You can say, or say like this candidate believes stronger in research funding than this candidate. As long as you stay away from political parties, candidates, and elections, you can talk about your issues. Another good example is I'm part of the LGBTQ community. Some people want to steer away from those issues. They say it's too political. My life is not political. People politicize my life, people politicize my family, but I'm not inherently political. People politicize issues. I think face masks is a great example. Those are not a political issue, but they are, been politicized. So I think people get really confused about that. And as long as you're talking about your mission and why we need to cure cancer and why we need LGBTQ equality and how it impacts our lives, or why we need to focus on health and equities, you are fine. That's just educating and talking about your mission.
Absolutely. And one thing that I like that you said is stop politicizing it, because then that begins to take the mission away. But look at it from a diversity perspective. How are we diverse when we're talking about this nonprofit? How is it equitable across the board, no matter where you come from? Where's the inclusivity? Is everyone being inclusive? And how do people feel like they have a sense of belonging? Because that's the new thing that's added to DE&I is the B, the belonging. And all of it has to work together in order for those synergies to really take effect and really be efficient and productive in the space.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Bethany, as we wind down, I want you to leave the listeners and viewers with your call to action, whether you want to challenge them to do something in the nonprofit advocacy space, whether you want to share some resources, or whatever the case may be, because this show is about educating, inspiring, and motivating while bridging the gap for a DEI and B.
Excellent. Well, I would just say, I think I want every single person this year, if your legislative session is not over, I want you to think about an issue that you care about, look up an organization who deals with it, and call your lawmaker and tell them why it's important to you. That's all. It takes 5 minutes. Their whole job is to listen to their constituents. I know sometimes we don't see that, or it seems hard to see that, but really their whole job is to listen to you. Just call up your lawmaker and leave a message, or tell them about an issue that's important to you and what you want to see happen. So one of the main barriers people have to engage in legislative advocacy is they think, does my lawmaker want to hear from me? Do they want to talk to me? They get intimidated. You hire them and fire them through elections, and you pay their salaries through taxes. You are the boss. Call them up and tell them about an issue that you're passionate about. But remember to be kind and courteous. Don't be mean to the people on the phone. Somebody's been on the phone.
Absolutely. That's a great call to action. Hold your legislative accountable and let them know what some of your concerns are and what some of your feedback is, because they're not mind readers. And if no one calls them and let them know, they're not going to know what's going on or what is needed. So Bethany, how can our listeners and viewers connect with you via your website and share where you primarily hang out on social media?
Yeah, definitely. So you can check me out at snyderstrategies.me. And I'm primarily on LinkedIn and Facebook. You can look at my page, Snyder Strategies, or Bethany Snyder on LinkedIn. And I love to comment on various nonprofit advocacy topics and other things going on, and lots of LGBTQ topics as well, if that's something you're interested in. So yeah, find me there and hit me up.
And there you have it, listeners and viewers of GEMS Podcast. You just heard Bethany Snyder, the nonprofit advocacy expert. She's definitely going to hold you accountable in this space, but then she's also going to bring you topics that are educational so you can learn more about the work that she's doing to help out communities, whether they're near or far. And if she can do it, you can too. So make sure you subscribe and share this segment. We're on 40 plus platforms. To see video components, you can head on over to YouTube and type in at GEMS with Genesis Amaris Kemp for all things video. And lastly, but not least, I want to thank you so much for continuing to support the mission of GEMS podcast. Because of you, we are now ranked in the top 3% globally out of 2.8 million podcasts for www.listennotes.com. And we wouldn't be here without people like you. So I would love for you to become a sponsor. So head on over to genesisamarisKemp.net and find out how to become a sponsor. Click on that podcast tab. Until next time, peace, love, and lots of blessings. Have yourself an amazing day and take that challenge. Actions without work is void. So go take those actions.